Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Today is November 10th, and this is another of our batch working group regular meetings. My name is Mate, and I'll be your host today. We have agenda packed with topics, so let me pass it over right away to Diana to talk about the phase 2 recommendation. Let me stop sharing. You should be able to share your.
Okay, great. Let me give it a try. Let's see, I just hit the big green. Okay, there it goes. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So just a recap, a couple of meetings ago or a meeting ago, we started to ask about what are the next steps for the batch working group. And I think the next phase is really to start to think about some recommendations out of the working group. And so I've started to really just collect some thoughts and some ideas and to prepare a document for us to iterate on. But I don't have anything yet, but at least I know our next meeting is not until after Thanksgiving in the US. So I at least wanted to just share some of my collection of information and then gather some quick feedback from the group to start to add some context to some of these items. So this is really just a discussion, and I'll be probably just adding some notes. And then I need to also, I started this document. It's not worth publishing yet, but as soon as I gather feedback from today, I'll need to make it public. And so I need some help from, I guess, the group to help me make it public for the working group. So today I intended just to really just capture a lot of the notes that I had, and then just kind of iterate put some organization on it to it in the next couple of weeks before we meet again, and then start to publish it so folks can to iterate on it. So that's kind of the goal today. Any questions before I get started?
Yeah, I just wanted to give more context, like if you folks remember that the one of the exit criteria for the batch working groups, or like what we characterized as the early exit criteria, is coming up with at least recommendations of how we can improve Kubernetes, core Kubernetes for batch workloads. And this is basically what I guess Diana is referring to as like working group batch recommendations. So that's the context, and that's why the title looks like what it is, like recommendations. We discussed in the charter that potentially we could, start owning some code, etc. But that's, I guess, down the way. The first step is to come up with recommendations, see who can execute these recommendations. If existing SIGs will execute on those recommendations, then the working group is delivered on its charter. If not, if we came up with a new, for example, control that needs ownership that does not fit in the existing SIGs, then there is a potential for the working group to evolve into a SIG. But that's too early now to discuss. Just wanted to highlight what we mean by recommendations here, with that and where that is coming from.
Yes, that's great. Thank you for that context. So I'm just going to be, I'm hoping we'll just be a lot of interaction today to talk about, things that may be missing or things that we want to add or reshuffle. So I did want to share that, and for folks that haven't visited the charter lately, there was this initial definition of deliverables of where recommendations might hit for the different SIGs. So this was just something I wanted to capture that's already been noted in the charter related to the SIGs apps. And then some items under there, updating the job API or perform a job controller, so that we can scale lots of jobs through that. And this, again, this is just things that we are thinking through of where we might make a recommendation on. We still need to define what those are, but these are some possibilities. And then the scheduling, SIG scheduling, right? And so the set of APIs for queuing, for job queuing, the auto scaling for capability of job level provisioning. I think this is also for the cluster auto scaling as well. And then, of course, the support for specialized hardware. And then the batch job specification, like multiple instances of pod, and I refer that down below as well. And as well as non-pod creating resources. One thing I wanted to take from here was if we thought through and talked about over the last couple of months, any other SIGs that might have some impact into the batch working group, or batch working group may have impact into the other SIGs. Have we thought that of any other SIGs that might have some recommendations coming from us? I wanted to start out with that to see if there's any other thoughts.
I mean, I guess the one is you down in your requirements from existing batch projects, we talk about multi-cluster, and I know that that's kind of a whole other thing, but I do that, like, if we're talking about trying to extend batch to multi-cluster, it might make sense to expand that, but I don't know what the reason was not having that at first.
So is there so folks that are more integrated in the Kubernetes system or ecosystem, is there a SIG that addresses multi-cluster?
We do have SIG multi-cluster, right? I'm not sure if it's SIG or a working group. I think
there is a multi-cluster SIG. Let me find the link to them.
And they own the multi-cluster service discovery API. I think that's what it is.
Great, so we may have some input into that, depending on what our recommendations are. Okay. Yeah, if you can send that API, the URL for that group, I'll put it in here as well. Once I publish this, we can add it as well. Okay.
I linked it in the chat. Yeah, there's a SIG multi-cluster with all their charter description and meeting notes, agenda recordings, who's in charge of it, and all the necessary channels and all those data you'll find in their README.
Great. Yep, found it. Oops, let me go back. Oops, that's not what we want.
Are these recommendations of like work needed for actually like what they need, or like what code the batch working group will also touch or involve? Because I know that I've seen at least some SIG apps and SIG storage issues come up that I don't know if we need to involve it in as part of this, but I guess that's what I'm curious about. It does seem like batch touches everything.
That is a good point. I am not as familiar with the requirements for the SIG storage. I'm sorry, for storage. I do know that's part of the batch provisioning of jobs. I'm assuming there's a SIG storage as well for this. So,
yeah, and you don't have to update the doc. This is just curious about like I don't know if we have any recommendations for SIG storage, but I know that like I'll talk later about some issues I found with SIG storage and some of like running batch jobs with volumes, and I don't know if like that is part like recommendations we want to give to SIG storage about that also, or is it unrelated to this? I don't know. So it's more a question.
I don't think that it's unrelated. My concern is like stretching ourselves thin.
Fair.
But at the end of the day, we want to collect all these requirements. So definitely we want to have that tracked, so that like down the road, we can get to these things at some point. Or if someone is taking the lead from the group, then this is definitely like an option as well, right? I guess my hope here was like from the past like I don't know how many months we've been running this working group is actually exactly this. Like we had this high level idea of what are the missing things, and the hope is that to make those things more concrete, right? Like these requirements, and start like to basically not necessarily like always find solutions to them as much as highlight these gaps, continue to track them, and then potentially evolve into concrete recommendations or even solutions. I don't know, like it's not like a strict answer, yes or no, but like I would say we need to track them, definitely. But I don't know if we're going to attack all of these things at once. So that's, I guess, what I'm trying to say.
Right, and we can lay them out as like a roadmap for the batch working group as well. So, and which ones we think we want to focus on first, or if there's some items that may not be on the first focus and somebody's willing to take it on, then that's something we can add as well. Okay. So I kind of tried to go through and just kind of capture the big, as you were saying, it's a big umbrella of things to consider. And so I was trying to just put all these in one spot. So, and I don't have a very good way of organizing this yet, in my head at least. So I tried to do some organization. I guess we could swizzle it, just your feedback is fine. This is really just for us to just really try to capture the breadth of the work or the requirements or the designs of things so that we can put some organization to it. So I started out with kind of highlighting some features or some enhancements, and they're kind of covered already some of these in the previous list. But I just started trying to jot as many of these down as I could discover from our past meetings. So one of the ones that we talked about a lot was the expansion of the batch job APIs, both from a multi-pod template resource, both for a multi-pod template definition as part of a job, a batch job, and multi-resources, things that either can be a pod creating resource or even non-pod creating resources. So these, again, this is just a collection. It's not something we need to define that we're going to do right away, but really just some of the aspects that I've heard from different solutions. And then there's some other requirements that I think I've seen, which is being able to have associated dependencies, maybe from between jobs or tasks within a job. So there's that's been expressed as an enhancement or a feature. Again, the throughput, and that's kind of captured up above, right? We want to be able to handle lots of jobs and expand what we can do to help improve the throughput of that. We've also talked about multi-cluster. We just talked about that earlier. Support for multi-cluster. Also, there's when there is some demand for network aware decisions, meaning placing the different jobs close together. So I added that as well. Topology aware, I think we've talked about that, the different types of resources that are available on the nodes. Cluster autoscaling, I think we're very familiar with that with regards to being able to meet demands based on the scaling up, the ability to scale up a cluster and then the storage use cases that we just brought up. Any other high-level features, descriptions that folks have been thinking through or have solved in their projects that that are missing from this list? Who can think of? Trying to be as encapsulating as possible.
I think the node requirements are missing. Well, I don't know if that's topology aware.
Yeah, this is supposed to be it. So this would be.
So the network aware is kind of cluster topology, and this one is the node.
Yes, this is for node. I've heard it called topology. I can change the name. If the name is confusing, no problem. I have no preference for naming. And I want to make sure we're as clear as possible. So
Is it only NUMA when we talk about on node topology? If it's NUMA, then we just call it NUMA aware. That's the distinction.
Let me see here. I was thinking NUMA aware, but I didn't want to be exclusive, so we'll keep that. And if that becomes a bigger scope, we can adjust that. Oops. We can adjust. Okay.
So those are like high level, extremely high level umbrellas, right? Like when we talk about cluster or scaling, that's just basically, it's a massive thing.
Yes.
What do we want to call out specific things underneath each one of them?
Yes, we can.
Concrete.
We can add. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm done.
Yeah, just to be more concrete. Like for example, all or nothing provisioning, for example, like under cluster or scaling, or bulk provisioning as well.
Oh wait, so let me just make sure I capture this. So are you when you say all or nothing, is that meaning when you submit a job, you need to make sure you can get all the resources for that job, or don't provision anything at all?
Yeah, exactly. Like or bulk provisioning APIs, let's call them, and then within them they could be all or nothing as one mode of operation.
Okay. And then you mentioned another one related to pods.
I was thinking about like reservations end to end, which is both scheduling and provisioning. It involves both.
Reservation.
And those could, for example, the API could be the same, but I'm just trying to.
Oh. Okay. Yeah, so any other kind of quantification for these areas that we want to think through?
So how about improved preemption? Because I think current preemption is sort of built very much on the assumption of preempting microservices that can be rebalanced. Whereas when preempting batch jobs, there's inherently a cost into preempting the job, and that may vary over the lifetime of the job.
Yeah, so
there's also preemption to fair share. So current preemption is just based on preempting to lower priority classes, right? Whereas if you start doing things like queuing and fair share, you would also like to preempt within a priority class to establish fair share.
yeah, so those are really valuable additional policies that we can add for the queuing support. So I kind of stuck those in a different section, but let me capture kind of what you were suggesting, which is preemption within a class. And I haven't gone through this section, so I apologize. So preemption support position within a queue, right?
Well, within a class, I guess it could be cross queue. Ideally, it would be cross queue because you're using it to establish fair share between queues.
I guess the point is like job level preemption, right? Like that's
Yeah.
the
That's also right.
But I think also pod level is relevant because at least in Spark you could actually preempt some of the workers and it will continue running, right?
Call it job aware preemption. Like it's still, it could either like preempt partial, like part of the job or all the job.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the difference is that you're aware of the job, right? Is that it like you're taking the job into consideration when doing preemption?
Great. So just let me just go through this. And again, if there's more information we want to add as we think through this, I'll add it up here at the top.
I
ahead.
want to add one more thing, general thing. So we have the NUMA implementation, which currently is kind of broken because there is no scheduling support. And then we have this kept for dynamic resource allocation, which is going through alpha, or it might go through into alpha in 126. And then we have this doc from, I think it was Marlo, about how to do device management. So I think one good outcome for the working group would be to unify all those initiatives so that we don't end up adding 3 different implementations for device management into kubelet and the rest of the system. So just kind of unified all these proposals that are in a way kind of opposite, or they are pulling in different directions.
And can you reiterate the 3 different ones again?
So one is the existing NUMA, how's it called, the topology manager. The other one is dynamic resource allocation. And the third one is the doc that Marlo shared. But I don't remember if we had a chance to discuss that in the working group.
So the doc that Marlo sent is an enhancement to the topology manager. It is not. It's not a replacement to dynamic resource allocation.
I think the doc that Marlo shared, she's talking about how do we move some of the components and the resource managers that exist within kubelet outside of kubelet, so people have more flexibility. Dynamic resource allocation is again maybe an alternative to device management. We have device plugin API, and we have this other mechanism to expose hardware within the cluster that have different requirements. If you need to maybe separate the life cycle of the pod from device instantiation, for example, then you could use that. These are again all very separate areas. Topology manager is related. It makes sure it aligns CPU manager, device manager, memory manager, but all this happens within kubelet. So these are all very related, but at the same time, it's very important to identify how do we move ahead in the community and identify the right path. They're a bit conflicting, but at the same time, they're different as well in their own way.
Gotcha. So am I missing a third sort of device management, or is one just a modification of the NUMA topology management?
You can mention the discussion about moving resource managers outside of kubelet.
I think it's called resource plugin.
Yeah.
And again, it's basically evolving the topology manager to be pluggable. I guess that's my understanding.
Yeah, topology manager, CPU manager, device manager, all these resource managers.
Okay. And I understand they may be overlapping, so. Great, thank you for bringing that up. Okay. As I mentioned before, I was trying to capture the specific aspects of the different sort of policies. And I call this dispatching, we can call this release, but it's essentially as the queuing happens and the workload is released from the queuing, you know, there's associated policies for that. You have the different queues. You can have priority service levels based. You want to address aging and starvation. Then there's quota management policies associated with how jobs are released from the queue, fair sharing, and of course, being able to do preemptions, as we mentioned earlier, within a queue or priority class, and preemption of pods within a job. I also mentioned that further down here. With regards to supporting, you know, a min-max type of workload. Beyond the policies, I was thinking about the batch workload or a batch workload or a batch custom resource. I think we mentioned that earlier. There may be some concept of creating a new CR or a new resource, I should say, where and related to that, and we kind of have some aspects of that, where, you know, in the job, everybody knows now you can actually hold the job and not release it to actually create the pods. So some concept of that, where there's a hold before creating the resources. There's also the concept of pausing a workload or a job. And that can be in multiple ways. You can pause it so that it doesn't create more pods and have it scale down, or you can just kill the job and put it back in the queue. So you can do all of the resources for that or a part of that. And then here's kind of where I was kind of associating this with preemption within a job, which is scaling, right? You have workloads, and a lot of these workloads, they do scale up in and out, right? So being able to express reduction and increasing the resources for that workload, and being able to queue those requests and release them from within the queuing system is a possible area we could look at. And then scaling, this would be scaling across different instance types, for in other words, different pod templates. So some pod templates you want to scale at a certain rate compared to the rest of the pod templates inside a job. So it can get pretty complex depending on the workload. So those are kind of some of the areas that I was capturing with regards to a workload that was being managed by the system. Right.
I have one like macro, I guess, question. So if you go up a little bit, if you see like most of the things that we have here are kind of associated with a specific thing we have in Kubernetes, right? Like expansion batch job API, we have batch, we have the job controller there. We can discuss that in that context, right? Same thing with increasing the throughput, for example, network aware. We can think of that maybe in the context of the scheduler, NUMA in the context of the node, cluster autoscaling. We know we have cluster autoscaler available already. Storage, again, we have a specific, you know, we have controllers, we have support. Now with queuing, we keep discussing this in generic terms, right? Lots of us have explored that area. We know kind of the requirements, but we don't have like a canonical playground to actually execute those ideas and put them in motion. like when we talk about for example, the working group charter, we want to make recommendations. When we talk about queuing, we're making recommendations to who, right? Like there is nothing in Kubernetes core, a controller or a group that we're going to make recommendations to. And so my suggestion here, and I want to plug in like the work that we're doing with Q with a K, is maybe we're getting to a time where it is possible that we can invest in a controller to actually put these things in practice and move them forward in a more material way, with the hope that this could eventually become something like a de facto with Kubernetes. If we kind of like at the higher level agree with the model that we have right now, which is if we want to integrate something with Kubernetes, we're not going to invent a new scheduler or autoscaler. So we need something that works with the current ecosystem that we have within core Kubernetes. And this is what Q is trying to do. I'm like suggesting that we kind of start discussing these things in the context of how we evolve it to support multi-cluster, storage requirements, and so forth. This is again, this is a proposal, and it comes again. I just want to reiterate we can't make progress, too much progress, if we don't have something. It's like tangible to work with, right? What would be the outcome for queuing support if we don't have something tangible to suggest to, right? Like a specific controller, etc. So I don't know what your thoughts here. This is my proposal. Like Q is in the very early stages. We can take it in whatever direction we want. If you believe that this is a model that can work for most use cases that we're discussing here, in terms of like, we're not replicating any controllers, it's a higher level job manager, then we can use that to continue to basically add hooks to Kubernetes, and this is what we would be like our recommendations or even contributions to core Kubernetes. Any thoughts on this proposal?
On a quick time check, we have about 10 minutes left still, and there's topic from Kevin. Unless Kevin is okay to push it over to the next time.
Yeah, I'm okay. It sounds like this is a needed conversation.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, thanks for the time check. So I have some comments, but I'll wait for others.
So if I'm hearing correctly, one of the questions here is whether we want to make Q the recommended approach for Kubernetes and potentially merge it into Q Controller Manager, let's say, or whether we can be more agnostic and just push some bits of it into Q Controller Manager, but still keep most of it outside of Kubernetes. I think that's kind of like the overarching question.
I guess when we talk about like we have policies, fair sharing, we're discussing them in what context, for example? Like we can't talk about theory, but then what? Right? Like what recommendation are we going to make to who? Right? Like how is the community going to benefit from these recommendations? I mean, queuing theory has been fully studied, right? Like in literature, and they have tons of schedulers out there, legacy ones. And so to make actual contributions to the community and make something more concrete that's useful, we want to put them in the context of a usable solution. Marcin?
Yes, so I have some concerns about the recommendation part. So recommendations should be followed by some actual engineering work, possibly executed by members of this group, because, well, recommendation is great, but someone needs to execute on these recommendations, and who would that be if all of the groups have probably like pages long backlog of features that they would like to have, but they don't have enough people or contributors to provide. And having like a product of our own, I mean, the group would create a place where these ideas could materialize. Otherwise, that would be just asking and hoping that the recommendation would move from page number 4 to page number 1 in the backlog.
Yeah, I'm trying to capture that. So
Yeah. So go ahead.
That was it.
So we discussed that when we started the batch working group. This part of the charter discussion. We couldn't say like, because we were asked for an explicit exit criteria that is achievable. So executing on every single thing we want to do was not deemed like, achievable. That is like, because we don't have the mandate, for example, to execute on all these groups. So that was like basically the first step, is to understand what are the gaps, what is it that we want to do with the various controllers that we have in core Kubernetes. That's why the consensus from the steering committee all the way down to people who are trying to start the working group is to start at least with recommendations as an early exit criteria. It doesn't mean that like we're already executing on the job API improvements, for example. So starting with the recommendations, and definitely anyone who is recommending something, we get to consensus, you will find someone who is excited to actually push it forward. Hopefully.
Yeah, I see it in Stick Out Scaling. We have great of ideas, but not that many people to implement them, and that's part of my concerns. If this group focuses only on recommendation and says that they don't have mandate to do anything in, I don't know, SIG, scheduling, auto-scaling, no, whatever. Everyone has a mandate to contribute and to send PRs and to be vocal advocate for the changes. And I don't think that the charter of the group should end at the place where the recommendation is meant and then left alone. Addition of steps should follow, like advocating for it, pushing it, asking about it, and trying to make it happen. And if a particular SIG has some concerns about recommendation, then this group should iterate on their feedback and possibly change the recommendation and change the design or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, this is discussed in the charter. Again, like this was the early exit criteria that was basically reasonable to achieve. Okay, and it doesn't mean that we like I guess in my mind, like it follows that if we make a recommendation, we make a recommendation because we're excited about this and we need it, and we will continue to definitely to advocate for it.
The other piece of ideas that I have is, what about word outside of Kubernetes? For example, do this group is responsible for making ask to cloud providers to expose some APIs that would make batch better? For example, from the cluster autoscaler point of view, this provisioning API would be better executed if cloud providers provided some standard way of asking for resources and queuing for these resources. Is it in the charter of this group, or is it explicitly outside?
that's interesting. I think it would be great if we could do something like that, but I think it's something we could consider and how how much more effective we could be with the standardization of something like that. I think that's an interesting
Maybe not
idea.
standardization, but at least having an option to do it, even if it meant that each cloud provider is a little bit different. Having this functionality is better than having nothing, even if it's not like super standard compliant.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting aspect. I'm going to capture it here and then maybe iterate on it a little bit and see how we might see if it would fall into this scope of our work. But that's a great point. And this is with relation to the autoscaler, right?
Yeah, so yeah, that's from, let's say, my background, but there are possible other implications of having better APIs, and to node-related work and stuff like that.
Yep. Okay. So we have 2 more minutes. I mean, so I kind of defer to the organizers of the group to understand how it works with regards to recommendations for supporting us, the Q implementation. My personal recommendation would be great. We have something to work with. Let's continue and iterate on it. But I don't know what the process is to officially accept that. So I'm kind of to defer that to the organizers of the group. And maybe you guys can give us some insight on how that's usually handled, or this is completely new. We could just need to make a decision or a vote, or just say it here. I don't have that expertise or experience. So I know a few of the organizers here are online. How does it usually manifest with regards to deciding on a technology and moving forward with it?
I wonder if we can do some sort of pilot with one of the high level items. For example, in job, I have some ideas of features we know we need, and I have a rough timeline for it. So maybe I could share that. That could be the pilot that we can replicate in other domains. The second one I can think of is the node domain. I think there are clear requirements, so we could come up with a timeline dog, and gather feedback and so on and so forth. I think queuing is the most complicated one because of the things that Abdullah said. There is no component in Kubernetes that does this. But maybe there could be.
But I think he's saying more than that also. He's suggesting that we take on Q as the target for the queuing recommendations. Q with a K. And that's kind of my question is that how do we as a group decide, yes, let's move forward with that, or no, consider other options as well?
So I can just give a quick comment. So at least for the foreseeable future, the work that I do on queuing would have to be within Armada for a couple of reasons. One, we have to do queuing outside of the cluster, so it's a wet CD at least for now. And we have to sort of make available the improvements we do within Armada. But I would love for it to be the case that the work I do can also contribute to things like queue. So to that end, maybe there's a way in which we can abstract away the queuing logic into something like a library. And we can then build our different products using the same core queuing library. I don't know, this may be something for further discussion, at least to see at least where we can collaborate on this. Because again, I would love to contribute to something that many people can use.
Okay. Okay, I know we're at over time, so I appreciate the feedback. We didn't get through some of this, but you got through a lot of it, and I think this is a good start. I'm going to try to capture as much as I can, put some of the questions that we have in a document, and then Abdullah, I guess I'll send it to you to make it public in the work group. I'm not sure how that works, but I'll just send it to
You
you.
just share it with the mailing list, and then automatically all the readers of the mailing list will get access to the document. It's
Okay.
good also to share it with this list and with the Kubernetes dev list. That's usually sufficient. Also, make sure to link it in the doc. I left there a place for.
I'm sorry, I missed the last part. Make sure to do what with the doc?
To also link it in the working
Slack
group
channel.
agenda.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, in the Slack channel or in the agenda when for people who are going through the agenda document, they can quickly navigate over to that one.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much, all. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.